care what your badge says, you have no jurisdiction here. Get off my property!
Your pathetic, unauthorized structure is contaminating our pristine water source, Mr. Ryder. Alara Vance's voice. It wasn't just loud. It was engineered to be heard, booming through a professional-grade sound system mounted on a golf cart. And every word of it was meant to shatter my composure. But I just sat there in my beat-up little pontoon boat, leaning back against the worn vinyl seat cushion, watching the whole theatrical performance unfold. She stood maybe 30 feet away, right at the edge of my property line, wearing this blinding, tailored emerald green power suit that practically glowed against the dark pines, with her silver hair pulled back into a severe, architectural bun that looked like it could stop a bullet. Behind her, the entire Blackwood Estates HOA board, 9 people, every single one of them, stood in a perfectly aligned V formation, all wearing matching green blazers, recording the scene on their phones like they were filming a mandatory public execution. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a well-rehearsed display of dominance, a ritual they performed for every resident who dared to question their absolute authority. They wanted the footage to go viral within the community, sending a clear, chilling message: don't mess with the Vances. They were absolutely sure this was the moment I got crushed. They'd been trying to get me for 3 months, threatening me with fines that made no sense. A $1,500 fine for inappropriate water velocity, a $3,000 fine for unauthorized use of rustic lumber. And now, Alara thought she had the hammer. "Officers," she called out, gesturing dramatically toward the 2 patrol cars idling on the road, their lights splashing red and blue across the glassy surface of the Willow Creek Preserve. "Arrest this squatter immediately. He has defied the community's cease and desist orders for the last time. He is trespassing on common land." I let my boat drift a little closer, the tiny wake whispering against the hull. "Interesting interpretation of property lines, Mrs. Vance," I called back, keeping my voice level, maybe even a little bored. "Especially since the structure in question, this pathetic, unauthorized structure you hate so much, is actually the Mainward Gate, located entirely on the parcel known as the Silas Hammond Estate, which, as of 90 days ago, is legally owned by me." The emerald green flushed instantly to a blotchy crimson on her neck. "That's what you call a breach in the tactical display. Don't play games with me," she hissed, abandoning the megaphone for a moment. "That old spillway has always been community property, a fact upheld by the ruling of Judge Thorne last year. You bought a swamp, not the infrastructure that controls our entire lake level." I reached into the waterproof bag I kept under the console, pulling out a laminated document. The kind of document that looked important because it had been left outside in the rain a few times, giving it that air of ancient, undeniable authority. "Before your men move to arrest me or touch my property, you might want to consider the implication of violating a federal land trust," I said, holding up the paper so the deputies could get a good look at the official-looking seal. "You see, this old weir, this swamp, doesn't just belong to me. It's the designated focal point of the Evergreen Trust of 1937, which, thanks to a very obscure piece of legislation, places this entire watershed under perpetual monitoring by the Department of Environmental Investigations." The deputy, bless his heart, actually took a step back from the water's edge. He knew that when you introduce the word federal into a suburban HOA dispute, the air changes, it gets heavy, and usually, someone ends up going to jail, and it's rarely the guy in the fishing hat. The Evergreen Trust was a ghost law, a relic from the New Deal era intended to protect migratory bird paths, but because the language stated the weir was indispensable to the preservation of the federally monitored water table, it superseded every local zoning law, every corrupt judicial ruling, and every HOA bylaw Alara had ever dreamt up. They had missed it because they only ever looked at titles and deeds. They never bothered digging into the forgotten statutes of the 1930s. Alara's power bun finally looked threatened. "That document is a forgery, a ridiculous, antiquated piece of paper designed to circumvent local governance. We will not be blackmailed. My husband and Judge Thorne have already secured a valid, recent injunction." But then, 2 things happened almost simultaneously, and that's when you knew the game was over. First, a heavy-duty pickup truck, the kind with massive tires and a construction logo, Vance Development, screamed to a halt on the access road, followed by two flatbed trailers hauling bulldozers. The sight of those massive yellow machines, their steel treads ready to chew up the earth, brought a physical sense of dread to the confrontation. The sound of their idling engines was the sound of their impending doom. Out of the cab jumped Victor Vance, Alara's husband and the real brains behind the operation, his face red and sweaty, pumped full of adrenaline and raw, desperate rage, ready to destroy the evidence, my doc, and me, in that order. Get those dozers unloaded. Unload them now, you idiots. Victor roared at his crew, not even looking at the police, focusing entirely on the weir. Tear down that illegal dock now. Judge Thorne signed the demolition order this morning. We don't have all day. His crew, two nervous men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, hesitated, their eyes darting between the armed deputies and the frantic HOA president. And second, my satellite phone, which I had placed conspicuously on the boat's dashboard, vibrated with an incoming call. The screen didn't show a number. It just read, EID command. I answered it on speaker, turning the volume all the way up. Agent Ryder. A crisp, female voice cut through the commotion. Do you have visual confirmation on the destruction of the federally designated structure? I looked right at Victor, who had frozen mid-shout, his mouth hanging open. Affirmative, Director. The subjects, Victor Vance and Alara Vance, are currently threatening to deploy heavy machinery against the Evergreen Weir structure, potentially destroying key forensic evidence relating to the Alastair Thorne contamination case. They are currently attempting to act on a fraudulent demolition order signed by a co-conspirator. The transformation of Alara's face was total. The purple that washed out the crimson was the color of sheer, irreversible panic. She knew the EID wasn't just about wetlands. They were about criminal prosecutions. Mr. Vance, the EID director's voice cut in again over the speaker, calm as an operating room. You are being monitored. We have documented confirmation of industrial barium and strontium contamination in the Willow Creek Preserve at levels 50 times the safe limit. These are the same toxins that resulted in the unnatural death of Silas Hammond. The source is confirmed as the Thorne Aggregate Facility. Your attempts to demolish the weir constitute the destruction of federal evidence and will result in additional felony charges for obstruction of justice. The naming of the specific toxins, barium and strontium, made Victor physically recoil. That chemical signature was their true smoking gun. He looked like he'd swallowed a grenade and realized the pin was gone. He turned to Alara, desperately. Theodore, call Alastair. He'll crush this in 5 minutes. He owns the state attorney. He has to stop the barium trace. He was so panicked he was giving away the critical details. It was Alara's nephew, Caleb Finch, the pale, perpetually anxious HOA treasurer standing behind her, who finally broke the silence. He was holding his emerald green blazer closed tight, despite the warm morning. He can't, Aunt Alara, Caleb whispered, his voice thin but carrying in the sudden silence. Senator Thorne was arrested at 8 a.m. at the Capitol building. The FBI froze all his assets an hour ago. You could hear the collective gasp from the 9 board members standing behind Alara. They were all suddenly reaching for their phones, not to record, but to frantically scroll through news feeds. The wall of intimidation was cracking. They were starting to realize their matching green blazers were now just uniforms in a criminal conspiracy. Caleb, Alara screeched, whirling around, her architecturally perfect hair finally breaking free of its constraints. You miserable little traitor. After everything I did for you. I paid for your law school. You snake. Caleb stepped away from the V formation, finally standing alone, but looking stronger than he had in the entire 3 months I'd been watching him. You didn't pay for it, Aunt Alara. You set up a fraudulent trust fund and used it to manipulate me and steal from the association. I have 5 years of records, every wire transfer, every kickback from Victor's construction bids, every falsified water report you made me sign. It's all on this. He held up a tiny, metallic USB drive, catching the morning sun, a glimmer of light in the shadow of their crimes. I watched Victor's bulldozer operators slowly climb back into their trucks, quietly shutting the doors. Even they knew they didn't want any part of this anymore. The sound of the approaching helicopters was no longer distant. It was a physical tremor in the air, building rapidly from the south. close enough now that you could see the dark silhouettes cresting the tree. I made my final call, my voice crisp and professional. Director, we have a full confession of financial conspiracy and obstruction of justice from the subject Caleb Finch, including 5 years of digital evidence. The primary subjects, Alara and Victor Vance, are attempting to flee, requesting full tactical deployment. The first black Suburban, unmarked but with the kind of reinforced grille that means business, barreled over the hill, followed by 3 more, sealing off the access road. Then the choppers were directly overhead, the downdraft churning the water of the Willow Creek Preserve. A woman stepped out of the lead SUV. She was maybe 5'7", but moved with the controlled intensity of a tiger. This was Special Agent Vera Hayes, the best of the best from the EID's Criminal Division. Her vest bore the bold yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agent Hayes's voice cut through the helicopter noise, requiring no amplification, carrying a quiet, lethal authority. Alara Vance and Victor Vance. You are under arrest for violations of the Clean Water Act, conspiracy under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, interstate fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. The word murder fell like a stone, sinking the entire operation. Silas Hammond hadn't just died from natural causes. They had been systematically poisoning him, just like they poisoned the lake. Alara's tailored green suit seemed to deflate, and she crumpled, held upright only by 2 FBI agents who moved in instantly. The click of the stainless steel handcuffs was the loudest sound in the universe. You can't. Alara stammered, her voice high and thin, the pink blotches turning to an ash gray. I am the president of this community. My authority is absolute. Agent Hayes paused while 2 agents escorted the rigid, catatonic Alara toward an SUV. She looked directly at Victor, who was already running for his truck. Victor Vance, freeze. He kept running, a desperate, pathetic scramble toward freedom that lasted all of 3 seconds before 2 more agents tackled him into the dirt, right next to his massive, impounded bulldozers. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. He was face down in the dirt he thought he owned. As the remaining board members were systematically processed, some crying, some arguing, all being served with federal subpoenas, a small crowd of residents started emerging from their million-dollar homes, drawn by the sirens and the sheer spectacle of federal authority. The Hendersons, who had been fined $10,000 for having a non-conforming mailbox. The Garcias, whose elderly mother had been mysteriously sick for months. They stood there, phones out, recording the collapse of the empire that had held them captive. Alara was being placed in the back of the SUV, and as the door was about to slam shut, she twisted her neck to look directly at me, the guy in the fishing hat, still sitting calmly in the pontoon boat. Who are you? She screamed, her last remaining shred of awareness focusing on the source of her destruction. I finally pulled off the beat-up fishing hat and the cheap polarized sunglasses, stepping out of the boat onto the mud and sand of the weir. Agent Hayes walked over and clapped a hand on my shoulder. Outstanding work, Special Agent Ryder. Operation Evergreen is a wrap. The collective gasp from the residents was almost musical. They were looking at Alex Ryder, the harmless new guy who loved fishing, the guy who'd just been fined $40,000 for water velocity violations, and realizing he was the federal agent who had just taken down the entire state's biggest crime ring. The story wasn't over. There was so much more to come. The investigation revealed that Judge Thorne, the senator's brother and Alara's loyal judicial puppet, had not only signed the fake demolition order that morning, he'd signed the fraudulent death certificate for Silas Hammond, all for a cut of the profits from the Vance Grand Estates development, the luxury resort they planned to build on the poisoned land. Caleb Finch, the nephew, stood off to the side, hands trembling, watching his aunt, his uncle, and his great-uncle all being led away. His immunity deal saved him from prison time, but the cost was astronomical. He'd lost his family and his identity, gaining only the unbearable truth. He walked over to Agent Hayes as the chaos subsided, looking hollow. Agent Hayes, he murmured. I did the right thing, I know, but my family. What happens to the money? The millions they stole from the residents? The $12 million in frozen offshore accounts will be liquidated and used for 2 things, Mr. Finch, Agent Hayes replied, her eyes sweeping over the quiet, stunned residents. First, restitution for every resident who suffered illegal fines or property seizure. And second, the environmental cleanup of this lake. It's going to take years, and the cost will be catastrophic, but the chemicals stop flowing today. The last thing I saw before I turned to start collecting the forensic equipment was Alara Vance being driven away, her face pressed against the smudged glass of the federal SUV. The emerald green of her suit was now just a fading, ugly memory. Sometimes, the people who claim to represent community excellence are the ones destroying it from the inside out. They used the petty, absolute power of the HOA to create a shield for murder, fraud, and environmental terrorism. They thought a piece of paper signed by a corrupt local judge could override federal law. And they learned the hard way that when you poison the water, you invite the kind of justice that runs deep and always finds its level. The lake will heal, the community will rebuild, and the names Vance and Thorne will become cautionary tales in every legal textbook. But here's the question I keep asking myself, the one that divides everyone. What about Caleb? He was complicit. He hid the crimes for years, but he was also the one who brought the whole damn empire down. Is his courage in the end enough to wipe away the cowardice that allowed Silas Hammond to die? Is he a hero or just another villain who finally cracked under pressure? I want to know what you think. If you've ever felt the absolute tyranny of a corrupt HOA, or if you believe Caleb deserves to walk free for saving his community, leave a comment below. Give this video a like if justice, no matter how long it takes, is something worth fighting for. And hit that subscribe button, because trust me, there are more pink suits out there waiting to be exposed. Thanks for listening, and stay safe out there.